found the letter she never meant for me to read. It slipped out from behind an old frame when I tried to straighten it on the wall. Just a soft sound, paper against wood, but it felt like the past exhaling. The envelope was worn, folded too many times, as if someone had held it in silence more than once. Her handwriting was the first thing I recognized. My mother's. A woman who left before I ever understood why absence can feel so loud. I didn't open it right away. My hands, they wouldn't stay still. Some truths arrive quietly, but they shake everything they touch. All I knew in that moment was this: whatever she wrote, it had waited years to find me. The frame had been crooked for weeks, maybe longer. I passed it every morning on my way to the kitchen, and every morning I told myself I'd fix it later. But later became a habit, and the tilt became part of the wall, until today. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was the light, the way it fell through the window at a different angle, catching the edge of the glass. Or maybe it was just time. I reached up, fingers steady, and tried to straighten it. The frame shifted. Something slid. A sound so small it almost wasn't there. Paper against wood, soft as a breath. I looked down. An envelope, worn at the edges, folded too many times. It sat on the floor between my feet, and for a moment I couldn't move. My hands stayed in the air, still holding the frame, as if letting go would make it real. The house was quiet. It's always quiet here. I live alone, have for years. It's easier that way. No one asks questions, no one stays long enough to notice the things I don't talk about. The walls are pale, the furniture is simple, everything in its place. I built this life carefully, like stacking stones, one decision at a time, each one designed to hold steady. But sometimes, when the light changes, I see the cracks. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. Not the weight of paper, but the weight of something held too long. The edges were soft, worn down by touch. Someone had opened this before, many times. I turned it over. No name, no address, just a crease down the middle where it had been folded in half. I knew the handwriting on the back. Even after all these years, I knew it. My mother's. I sat down on the floor, not because I wanted to, because my legs stopped working. The envelope rested in my lap, and I stared at it the way you stare at something you've been afraid of your whole life. My mother left when I was 7. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. One morning she was there, making toast in the kitchen, humming something I didn't recognize. The next morning she wasn't. No one explained. They just kept moving, kept working, kept pretending that silence was the same as stability. And I learned to do the same. I don't remember much about her. That's the strange part. You'd think losing someone so young would burn their face into your memory forever, but mine didn't work that way. What I remember are pieces. The smell of her shampoo, lavender, maybe, or something close. The way she folded laundry, slow, methodical, like she was trying to make each shirt last forever. The sound of her voice in the hallway at night, talking in a tone I couldn't decipher. Not angry, not sad, just worn. After she left, I used to search for her in places she'd never been. I'd look for her at the grocery store, scanning faces in the produce aisle. I'd watch women walking alone on the sidewalk, wondering if one of them might turn and recognize me. I never told anyone I did this. It felt like a secret I was keeping from myself. The envelope stayed in my lap. I didn't open it. Not yet. My hands wouldn't stay still. They kept folding and unfolding, gripping my knees, tracing the seam of my jeans. Some truths don't need to be rushed. They've already waited this long. The frame was still crooked on the wall. I looked up at it. It was a photo of a garden. Not ours, just some generic image I'd bought at a thrift store because the frame was cheap and the wall was empty. I'd never cared what the picture was. It was just something to fill space. But now I wondered if someone had chosen it deliberately, if the garden meant something I'd never understood, if the frame itself had been placed there for this exact moment. I stood up, slowly. The envelope stayed in my hand. I walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty. A few leaves moved across the pavement, pushed by wind I couldn't hear. Everything looked the same as it always did, but something inside me had shifted. I sat down at the kitchen table, set the envelope in front of me, stared at it. The handwriting was faint, written in pencil that had smudged over time. I traced the letters with my finger, not reading them, just feeling the shape of her hand pressed into the paper. She wrote this. Her fingers held this pen. Her thoughts became these words, and then she hid it. Why? Why leave something and never give it to me? Why write words meant to stay silent? I thought about the last time I saw her. It was morning. I was sitting at the table, eating cereal. She kissed the top of my head. "Be good," she said. And I was. I was so good. I folded my napkin. I put my bowl in the sink. I went to school and didn't cry, and came home and waited. She never came back. For years, I told myself it was my fault, that I must have done something, said something, been something that wasn't enough. Children do that. They take the weight of the world and make it fit inside their small hands. I stopped believing that eventually, or at least, I stopped saying it out loud, but the feeling stayed. It lived in the space between my ribs, quiet and heavy, a question I learned not to ask. The envelope sat there, patient, waiting, the paper inside pressing against the fold. I picked it up again, ran my thumb along the seal. It had been opened before, carefully so the paper wouldn't tear. I could open it the same way. I could read whatever was inside and finally know, or I could put it back, slide it behind the frame, let it stay hidden, pretend I never found it. But I knew I wouldn't do that. Some things can't be unseen, even before you see them. I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, the kind that feels fragile, like it might crumble if you hold it wrong. I unfolded it slowly, one crease at a time. The handwriting was the same, neat, controlled, the kind of handwriting that hides emotion behind perfect loops. I didn't read it right away. I just looked at the way the words sat on the page, at the spaces between them, at the smudges where the pencil had pressed too hard and left shadows in the grain. When I was a child, I used to think my mother was perfect, not because she was, but because I needed her to be. She was the one who made breakfast, who brushed my hair, who tucked me in at night and turned off the light, and closed the door just enough so I wouldn't be afraid of the dark. She was the center of everything, and then she was gone. The house became smaller after that. The rooms felt emptier. Chairs stayed pulled out from the table. Laundry piled in baskets, unfolded. Silence settled into corners and never left. I remember one night, a few months after she left, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door. I could see a shadow under the crack of light. I waited for a knock, for someone to come in, to say something. But the shadow just stayed there. After a while, it moved away, and I never asked why. I became good at not asking, good at not needing, good at building a life where nothing unexpected could happen because I controlled every piece. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and imagine her coming back. Not in a grand way, just showing up, knocking on the door, standing on the porch. I'd open it, and she'd look at me and say something simple, and I'd let her in. We'd sit at the kitchen table, and she'd explain everything, and it would make sense. All of it would finally make sense. But she never came, and eventually, I stopped imagining it. I looked down at the letter. The words were small, cramped together. She'd written this quickly, or maybe she'd run out of space, or maybe she'd just run out of time. I started to absorb what was there. The first line wasn't what I expected. It didn't start with my name. It just started. A sentence in the middle of a thought, as if she'd been writing this in her head for years, and finally put it on paper. She wrote about leaving. Not why, just what it felt like. She described standing at the edge of something and knowing she couldn't turn around. She said she didn't plan it. She said she woke up one morning and realized she couldn't stay. Not because of me, not because of anyone else, because something inside her had already left. I read that part twice, the meaning underneath the words. She wrote about her mother, my grandmother, a woman I never met. She died before I was born, and no one ever talked about her. The letter said her mother was cruel, not in obvious ways, not with violence or shouting, but with silence, with coldness, with the kind of absence that lives inside presence. She described being looked at the way you look at something broken that you don't know how to fix, and after a while, believing it, that she was broken, that something inside her didn't work the way it should. She wrote about growing up in a house where love felt conditional, where approval had to be earned, and mistakes were remembered longer than anything good. She learned to disappear before anyone could ask her to leave. I paused, set the letter down. The paper rested against the wood grain, the edges catching the light. I could see where the folds had softened from being opened, where her fingers had held it. I'd never thought about my mother as a daughter, as someone who had her own mother, her own childhood, her own scars. I'd only ever thought of her as the person who left me. I picked up the letter again. The paper was warm now, from my hands, from sitting in the afternoon light. She wrote that when she had me, she promised herself she'd be different, that she'd be the kind of mother her mother never was, warm, present, available. But the letter said it didn't work that way. The more she tried, the more she felt herself becoming the very thing she feared. She caught herself saying things in the same tone, looking at me the same way her mother had looked at her, and it terrified her. The meaning became clear, even though the words themselves blurred. She thought staying would break me the way she'd been broken. I stopped breathing. She didn't leave because she didn't love me. She left because she thought staying would hurt me more. I traced the edge of the paper, felt the roughness where it had been folded. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out at nothing. She thought she was protecting me. She thought leaving was the kindest thing she could do. But it wasn't. It wasn't kind. It was devastating. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to crumple the letter and throw it away and pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. because underneath the anger there was something else, something I didn't want to name: understanding. I sat back down. The letter was still in my hand. I hadn't finished absorbing it. The paper felt thinner now, as if holding it had worn it down further. She wrote about the last morning, the morning she left. The letter described standing in the kitchen, watching me eat cereal, and feeling the weight of everything she was about to do. She kissed the top of my head and told me to be good, because she didn't know what else to say. She walked out the door and didn't look back, because if she did, she wouldn't have been able to leave. She didn't explain where she went, or how long she stayed away, or if she ever thought about coming back. Even without saying it plainly, the letter carried the sense that I went with her, every day, in a way that felt like both comfort and punishment. What she was really saying was harder than any sentence. She didn't trust herself near me, not with my childhood, not with my softness. The letter didn't read like a confession. It read like someone stepping back from a doorway because they were afraid of what they might bring inside. I set the letter down. The fold marks were deep, permanent. She was wrong. I did inherit her shadows, not because she stayed, because she left. I grew up building walls, learning to need nothing, learning to expect nothing, learning that love was something that could vanish without warning. I didn't become her. I became the shape of her absence. And that was the part I never knew how to forgive, not her leaving, but what it taught my body to expect. My fingers went numb. The letter slipped a little, like it wanted to fall. I sat there staring at the table, at the thin paper, at the place where the light hit the folds, and I realized something quietly brutal. I had spent my whole life trying to be unbreakable, because a part of me still believed love was something that couldn't survive staying. I didn't cry. I just couldn't move. The room held its breath with me. But she didn't know that. She couldn't have known. I picked up the letter again. The weight of it had changed. Or maybe I had. Near the end, her handwriting started to shift. It got messier. The lines slanted. The words bunched together. She was crying when she wrote this. Even through the smudges, the meaning came through. This choice cost her more than anything, and she did it because she loved me, not in spite of it. But there was something else, too, something she wrote near the very end that I could barely make out, a hope that I would become someone she couldn't reach with her patterns, that I'd never understand why she had to go, because if I did, it would mean I carried the same weight, and she never wanted that for me. I folded the letter, carefully, the way she must have folded it all those years ago. The paper resisted, wanting to stay open, but I pressed the creases back into place. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake, wondering what I'd done wrong, all the ways I'd tried to make sense of being left behind, all the years I'd spent believing I wasn't enough. And now I knew it was never about me. It was about her, about the fear she carried, about the pattern she thought she'd break by walking away. But patterns don't break that easily. They just change shape. I thought about my own life, the way I'd built it, the way I kept people at a distance, the way I told myself I didn't need anyone. Was I repeating her? Or was I trying to avoid her? Maybe both. I stood up, walked to the frame on the wall. It was still crooked. I straightened it. This time, it stayed. The envelope sat on the table, empty now except for the letter inside. The edges had softened even more from being handled. I could see the grain of the paper where the light came through. The light was different now, softer. It had that late afternoon quality, golden and thick, like it was holding something it couldn't name. I sat at the table again. The letter was in front of me, folded, resting against the grain of the wood. The pencil marks had faded in some places, where the paper had been touched too many times. I didn't need to read it again. The words were already inside me. I thought about the story I'd been telling myself for 30 years. The story where I was the one left behind, the unwanted, the not enough. But that wasn't the story. Not really. Though understanding it didn't undo any of it. Didn't give me back the years I spent believing I was the reason. Didn't make the silence less heavy. Didn't replace what a child needs most, to be chosen, not saved from. I could see why she left, but seeing why doesn't erase what it cost me to grow up in the space she left empty. The real story was about a woman who thought she was poison, who looked at her own daughter and saw a future she couldn't bear, who believed the greatest act of love was disappearance. She was wrong, but she believed it, and belief is a powerful thing. I thought about my grandmother, the woman I never knew, the woman who taught my mother that love was something you earned and lost and never quite believed in. How far back does it go? How many generations of women learned to protect their daughters by leaving? I didn't have an answer, but I knew this. My mother didn't abandon me because she didn't care. She abandoned me because she cared too much in the wrong way. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, but it was human. I stood up, walked to the counter, rested my hands against the cool surface. Outside, the world kept moving. A car passed. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, someone was living a life that had nothing to do with mine, and that felt freeing. I wasn't the center of my mother's story. I was a chapter, an important one, but not the only one. She had a life before me, pain before me, fear before me, and she carried all of it when she walked out the door. I turned away from the counter, looked at the letter. The folds were deep, the edges soft. I thought about what to do with it. Burning it, keeping it, putting it back behind the frame and letting it stay hidden for someone else to find. But none of those felt right. Instead, I picked it up, unfolded it one last time, let my eyes rest on the final lines. The meaning was there, quiet and aching. She hoped I'd become someone untouched by what she feared most in herself. She hoped I'd never carry the same weight. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and then I did something I didn't expect. I let something soften. Not forgiveness, not entirely, but something close. Something that allowed the anger to sit beside the understanding without needing to win. I saw her not as the woman who left, but as the woman who couldn't stay. And maybe that was as close to peace as I'd ever get. Some wounds are inherited, and some people spend their whole lives trying not to pass them on, even when they fail. The house felt different. Not in a way I could point to, just lighter. I put the letter in a drawer, not hidden, not displayed, just somewhere safe. The envelope rested against the wood, the paper inside, settling into stillness. I didn't need to keep reading it. I didn't need to keep turning it over in my mind. I knew what it said, and I knew what it meant. That was enough. I walked back to the living room. The frame on the wall was straight now. The picture inside, the garden I'd never cared about, looked different. Maybe because I was looking at it differently. Maybe because I was looking at everything differently. I sat down on the couch. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, long and warm, and I let myself sink into it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding something together. I just was. I closed my eyes, and I thought about my mother, not as she was when she left, but as she must have been when she wrote that letter, alone, afraid, trying to do the right thing in the only way she knew how. I didn't agree with her. I still wished she'd stayed. I still wished she'd chosen differently. But I understood, and understanding, even when it doesn't erase the hurt, changes the shape of it. I opened my eyes. The light had shifted again. It always does. I stood up, walked to the window one last time. Outside, the street was empty. The leaves had stopped moving. Everything was still. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her to come back. Not for an explanation I'd never get. Not for a version of the past that could rewrite itself. I was just here, and that felt like enough. I turned away from the window, walked to the kitchen, made tea. The steam rose in soft curls, and I watched it for a moment, the way it disappeared into nothing. Some things leave, some things stay, and some things do both. I picked up the cup, felt the warmth against my palms, and I breathed, slowly, deeply. The letter was in the drawer. The frame was straight on the wall. The light was fading outside. And I was still here, not healed, not whole, but less heavy. She didn't leave me because I wasn't enough. She left me because she thought I was. She left so I wouldn't learn to carry what she couldn't put down. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected from the part of her she feared I'd become. I set the cup down, felt the warmth leave my hands, and for the first time, I let that be true. The past didn't return. It finally rested. Some distances are measured in years, others in what we finally stop carrying.